Prince William was only moments away from entering one of the most important state briefings of the year, when he suddenly stopped outside the secured chamber. Through the partially open door, he saw a man who had never been approved to attend. It was Queen Camilla's closest aide. William's expression hardened. He turned to the waiting officials, delivered a 5-word order, and brought the entire briefing to an immediate halt. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William did not raise his voice. Cancel the briefing. Clear everyone out. The command cut through the corridor. Senior officials froze as the prince refused to cross the threshold. This was a state briefing, a controlled meeting where senior royals and government-linked advisors discussed security, duties, and decisions affecting the crown. Every chair had been assigned. Every name had been cleared. Yet Sir Adrian Vale was standing inside. Camilla's trusted advisor had spent years handling private schedules, sensitive messages, and contact between her household and senior palace offices. Adrian understood how the institution worked, and he knew restricted rooms were never entered by accident. That made his presence more disturbing. The Queen Consort had relied on him during tense periods, but this meeting had been kept outside her private circle because it concerned the King's responsibilities and William's expanding constitutional role, meaning the official duties he was preparing to carry for the monarchy. The future king stared at the attendance list while a senior official tried to rescue the morning. The man suggested a delay, a quiet correction, perhaps an explanation after the briefing began. William closed the folder without reading a page. Then he placed it on a table and stepped back. The gesture was calm, but its meaning was brutal. He would rather stop the entire process than pretend the breach did not matter. Charles had not yet arrived, but the king's absence deepened the tension. William asked who had admitted Adrian, who had approved his route, and why no security alert had been raised. Each answer came slowly. The aide's name was missing from the list. No written authorization existed. Still, he had entered through a side corridor reserved for the monarch's senior staff. Then the final detail emerged. Adrian had not been searching for the correct room. He had not been standing near the doorway or speaking to a confused courtier. He had been waiting beside William's designated chair. The cancelled briefing shocked the household, but the deeper danger lived behind the palace doors, because the prince knew Camilla's aide had entered that chamber with a purpose. Behind the cancelled briefing stood 3 people bound by duty, but divided by trust. William saw the monarchy as something that had to be protected before it could be inherited. Camilla saw her household being pushed away from the center of power. Sir Adrian saw himself as a loyal servant, carrying out necessary instructions. Yet loyalty inside a royal palace is rarely simple, and every private promise can become a weapon when succession draws closer. William had carried more of the royal burden whenever King Charles needed support. The change had happened slowly, but its meaning was impossible to ignore. The prince was no longer simply observing the machinery of the crown. He was entering state discussions, reviewing security decisions, and preparing for responsibilities that would one day become his alone. A constitutional role meant the official duties attached to the monarchy, and those duties depended on confidential information remaining protected. Camilla understood that shift, but she feared what it might cost her. The Queen Consort had built a small circle of aides who guarded her schedule, carried private messages, and ensured that her concerns reached the right rooms. Sir Adrian Vale stood at the center of that circle. He had become more than an employee. He was the man she trusted when palace doors closed and formal voices became impossible to read. William saw danger in that loyalty. He believed no private relationship could override official authority, especially when the future of the crown was involved. The prince feared that Camilla's household had begun treating access as something personal, almost inherited through closeness to the king. That possibility troubled him more than the cancelled meeting itself. The future king entered a private office before speaking to anyone. He unfolded a handwritten list of approved royal contacts and found Adrian's name near the center. William drew one firm line through it, then stopped. His hand remained over the page, as though the mark carried more weight than expected. Removing the aide meant challenging the Queen. It also meant accepting that trust inside the family had already begun to fracture. Camilla received the news without speaking at first. She gripped the arm of her chair and asked why William had not called her before dismissing someone she trusted. The humiliation cut deeply, because officials had watched the order unfold. She felt the prince had not merely rejected Adrian. He had rejected her judgment. Sir Adrian defended himself in a recorded conversation with a senior household officer. He said he had entered the chamber after receiving a verbal instruction connected to the Queen. Yet when asked whether Camilla herself had issued it, he refused to answer. Charles now stood between his wife and eldest son. But before the king could intervene, William demanded 6 months of access records from every restricted royal meeting. What looked like one unauthorized appearance was becoming something darker, and those records would lead him back to the ceremony where the first boundary had already been broken. The confrontation had not begun outside the state briefing room. It had begun weeks earlier during a closed investiture rehearsal at Windsor, when William noticed Sir Adrian speaking quietly to an official responsible for the future king's schedule. At the time, the exchange appeared brief and harmless, but one sentence was overheard. One sealed timetable was moved, and William never forgot the aide's reaction when he realized the prince had been standing close enough to hear everything. William had attended the rehearsal to review the movement of senior royals during an upcoming investiture, a formal ceremony where honors are presented on behalf of the crown. The gathering was tightly controlled because it involved security routes, private timings, and the order in which key family members would appear. Only working royals, protection officers, and a small group of constitutional advisors had been approved to enter the inner planning room. Sir Adrian Vale had permission to remain in the outer reception area because he was assisting Queen Camilla. He was supposed to handle her schedule and relay practical messages. He had no authority to discuss William's future engagements or enter the room where the ceremonial sequence was being finalized. The prince heard Adrian before he saw what the aide was doing. The Queen must see the final sequence before the prince approves it, he told the scheduling official. Then the advisor reached toward a sealed timetable marked for William's office. William stepped forward and placed his hand over the timetable. He did not shout. He simply asked who had granted Adrian the authority to touch it. The aide pulled his hand back, but the silence that followed was more revealing than any answer. He glanced toward the doorway, then toward the official, as though searching for protection that was no longer there. Camilla later called the encounter a misunderstanding, caused by overlapping duties. In a private conversation documented by a senior courtier, she told William that Adrian had only been trying to prevent confusion. The Queen Consort treated the matter as a minor clash between two busy households. William accepted her explanation in public, but he did not believe the issue was minor. The future king felt that his concern had been reduced to wounded pride, when the real danger involved control over his schedule and future role. That distinction stayed with him. The access records confirmed his fear. Adrian returned to the inner planning area after William left. A revised copy of the ceremonial sequence was then sent to Camilla's household before it reached the prince's office. William now understood that the state briefing was not an isolated mistake. He arranged a private meeting with Camilla and ordered Sir Adrian to attend. The memory of that stolen timetable followed him toward the closed door, where courtesy would finally give way to accusation. There were no cameras, no ceremonial smiles, and no line of courtiers to soften the moment. William entered the private chamber, carrying the cancelled briefing list. Camilla was already seated, with Sir Adrian standing several feet behind her. The prince closed the door himself. Then he placed the list on the table and asked one question: who had ordered the aide into a meeting concerning the future authority of the crown? William kept his voice controlled, but every word carried anger. He explained that Sir Adrian Vale had compromised a state-level discussion, meaning a confidential meeting tied to royal security, government duties, and the official work of the monarchy. This was not a private family dispute. The breach had placed sensitive responsibilities inside the reach of someone who had never been cleared to hear them. Camilla refused to accept that judgment so easily. She defended Adrian's years of service and reminded William that the Aide had handled private schedules, urgent correspondence, and delicate household matters without causing scandal. The Queen Consort believed the cancellation had been too severe. To her, the prince had punished a trusted servant before allowing him to explain why he was there. William turned toward Adrian. "Were you there for the Queen, or were you there to watch me?" The question left no space for ceremony. Sir Adrian looked at Camilla before answering, and that single movement exposed the truth of his loyalty. He did not first look toward the future king. He looked toward the woman he had been protecting. Camilla reacted at once. She accused William of treating her household like an enemy hidden inside the palace. She said he had humiliated her before senior officials, who already questioned whether she should have any influence over the next stage of the monarchy. Her anger carried something deeper than pride. It carried fear. William did not retreat. He told Camilla that embarrassment was not the issue. The real betrayal was allowing private loyalty to enter a room where national responsibilities were being discussed. The prince had trusted his father's household to defend that boundary. Instead, someone inside it had crossed the line. Sir Adrian finally broke his silence in the recorded account of the meeting. He admitted that he had been told to observe whether the briefing contained proposals that could reduce Camilla's future access once William assumed greater control. He did not name the person who gave the order, but he no longer denied the purpose. Camilla did not reject the concern. She looked directly at William and asked whether he had already begun planning a monarchy in which she would have no meaningful place. That question changed everything. The confrontation was no longer about one aide. It was about who would hold influence when the crown eventually passed from father to son. Royal power rarely announces itself with shouting. It moves through access lists, private audiences, sealed schedules, and the quiet right to decide who enters a room. By canceling the briefing, William had exercised that power without asking permission. Camilla understood the message immediately. Yet the prince's authority was not absolute, and one person still stood above both of them. King Charles now had to choose whether to defend his wife's household or support his heir's demand for control. Charles remained the sovereign, the person who held final authority over the royal household and its official structure. So William could refuse to attend a meeting, but only the king could permanently decide who entered state briefings and who remained outside them. That made the crisis more than a clash between two households. It forced the monarch to judge his wife's circle against the future king's trust. Camilla's influence had always worked through closeness. She spoke to Charles before many formal decisions reached a desk, and the Queen Consort understood how deeply he relied on her judgment. That bond gave her power without requiring a public order. But the same closeness now made every private intervention look more dangerous. The king received the access report alone. He read the entry showing Sir Adrian Vale entering the restricted chamber without approval, removed his glasses, and placed the file on the table. Charles said nothing for several minutes. The silence exposed the conflict inside him. He wanted to protect Camilla, yet he could not ignore that William believed her household had been watching him. William refused to call it a family misunderstanding. In a private conversation recorded by a senior secretary, the prince told his father that the monarchy could not survive through competing private courts. A private court meant a separate circle of aides and influence operating around one royal figure. If Camilla's household could enter meetings without approval, then official authority had already begun to fracture. Charles felt the warning personally. Supporting William could wound the woman who had stood beside him through years of pressure. Defending her could tell his son that emotional loyalty mattered more than secure government. The king now faced a choice, with no painless answer. Then the report revealed something worse. Sir Adrian's temporary security clearance had been extended twice by a senior household officer using Camilla's internal authorization code. Neither extension had reached Charles's desk. Someone had used the Queen Consort's authority while keeping the sovereign outside the decision. The king immediately summoned the officer responsible. But before that meeting began, Adrian tried to enter the palace and found that his credentials no longer worked. Someone had already acted to contain the damage. The locked pass was only the first consequence, and the person most shaken by it was not the Aide. It was Camilla. By the following morning, the palace had changed around Sir Adrian without issuing a single public announcement. Doors that had opened for years remained locked. Staff who once greeted him warmly avoided his eyes. His diary access disappeared, his meetings were removed, and his name vanished from the Queen's traveling household. For Camilla, the silence was worse than a formal dismissal, because it showed that William's decision was already reshaping the palace. Sir Adrian Vale was informed that his clearance had been suspended, while a full internal review took place. The clearance was the official permission allowing him to enter restricted royal areas and handle protected information. He was ordered to surrender his temporary pass, restricted telephone, and access keys before leaving the royal offices. No accusation was spoken aloud, but every object he returned carried the weight of judgment. The cancelled state briefing was rescheduled under new controls. Every attendee would now need direct approval from both the Sovereign's office and William's constitutional team, the group responsible for helping the prince prepare for official duties linked to the crown. The change mattered because it removed the informal paths that had allowed private households to influence who entered sensitive meetings. Camilla watched Adrian place his pass on the desk and empty the final drawer of his office. He apologized for bringing difficulty to her household and said he had only tried to protect her position. The Queen Consort struggled to answer. At last, she told him that he had followed what he believed was expected. Her words sounded like comfort, but they also carried an admission neither of them could ignore. Sir Adrian turned toward the doorway and began to leave. Camilla moved after him, almost calling him back, then stopped. The door closed before she spoke. For the first time, she was left alone with the consequences of the loyalty she had encouraged and the fear that had allowed it to cross a forbidden line. William felt no triumph. The prince knew the suspension would be seen by many as a direct attack on the Queen. Yet he also understood that allowing the breach to pass would weaken every boundary he might later need to defend. The future king could not ask others to respect rules he had failed to enforce at the first serious test. Then the internal review uncovered something worse. Adrian had received summaries from 2 earlier state briefings. Those summaries had been forwarded from an account connected to Camilla's private office. Charles now held proof that the problem extended beyond one room and one morning. But instead of summoning another council, the king requested a private conversation with William alone. With every aide removed, father and son would finally have to decide whether enough trust remained to save the monarchy from dividing itself. Charles and William met without private secretaries, constitutional advisors, or members of either household. For once, there was no institution standing between them. The king looked tired rather than angry. William looked determined but wounded. On the table rested the same briefing folder the prince had refused to open. Charles pushed it toward his son, then admitted that the crisis had exposed something neither man could ignore. The palace was becoming divided by personal loyalty. Charles spoke first. He admitted that Camilla's household had become used to informal access because he had often relied on her during difficult periods. The Queen Consort had offered support when pressure around the crown became heavy, and her aides had gradually learned to move close to decisions before those decisions became official. What began as trust had slowly become a system. William listened without interrupting. Then the prince explained why that system could not continue. The future monarch could not inherit a palace where friendship, marriage, or personal closeness quietly bypassed formal safeguards. Those safeguards were the rules that protected sensitive meetings, official duties, and the constitutional role of the crown. Without them, loyalty could become more powerful than authority. Charles looked at his son and asked the question that had been hanging over every room since the cancellation. Had William stopped the briefing to protect the monarchy, or had he done it to challenge Camilla? The answer came slowly. William said he had acted because he feared the two had become impossible to separate. Her household had entered state matters through private trust, and every attempt to question that access was treated as a personal attack. The prince did not want to fight the queen consort. He wanted to stop the monarchy from dividing into rival circles. The king finally admitted his own fear. He had resisted restricting Camilla's aides because he worried that she would become isolated. As his reign changed, and William assumed more responsibility, Charles knew the balance of power was shifting. He also knew the woman beside him could feel that shift more painfully than anyone. William softened, but he did not retreat. He promised that Camilla would keep her dignity, security, and respected place within the family. Yet, constitutional access could not pass through marriage or friendship. The crown had to decide, through one clear system, not several private doors. Charles agreed. Every future state briefing would use one unified approval process. Neither Camilla's household nor William's team could add names alone. Father and son had finally chosen the monarchy over private comfort, but the decision still had to be delivered to Camilla, and her answer would decide whether the family remained wounded but united, or broke apart completely. The palace attempted to describe the cancelled briefing as a scheduling adjustment, but the explanation collapsed within hours. The missing motorcade, the hurried departure of officials, and Sir Adrian's sudden absence from Camilla's side created a story too large to contain. By morning, the private struggle had become a national spectacle, and one newspaper image captured the entire crisis. William walking forward, while Camilla's closest aide left through a separate gate. Palace Communications issued a restrained statement, confirming that the state briefing had been postponed, while internal access procedures were reviewed. Those procedures were the formal security rules deciding who could enter confidential royal meetings and handle protected information. The wording sounded controlled, but it failed to explain why senior officials had left so suddenly, or why Sir Adrian Vale had disappeared from the Queen Consort's schedule. Broadcasters quickly recognized the deeper meaning. They framed the cancellation as the strongest test yet of William's authority, and a clear sign that the prince intended to place firmer limits around his future role. The story mattered, because the conflict was no longer hidden inside one royal household. The public could now see the pressure created by a changing monarchy. With Charles still on the throne, and his son already defending the powers he would one day inherit. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered beneath television screens carrying the headline, "William stops state meeting after palace access breach." Some people applauded the future king for acting decisively. Others spoke with sadness, fearing that the family was turning against itself at the very moment unity mattered most. A national newspaper pushed the drama further. Its front page showed William leaving the palace beneath the words, "The heir draws the line." Beside him appeared a smaller image of Adrian surrendering his security pass. The contrast was brutal. One man moved toward greater authority, while the other was shown losing access he had once taken for granted. Camilla felt exposed by every headline. She believed the public had already judged her as the hidden force behind the breach. The Queen Consort feared that years of duty had been reduced to one accusation: secret influence operating behind closed doors. William refused to let Adrian carry the entire scandal. In a documented discussion with Palace Communications staff, the prince rejected a statement blaming the Aide alone. He insisted that the new unified approval system be announced publicly and accepted responsibility for canceling the briefing. Charles supported that decision. Then the king walked beside his son toward Camilla's sitting room. The crowds had chosen their verdict, but the final judgment would be delivered in private, where she had to decide whether dignity meant resistance or acceptance. Camilla listened without interruption, as Charles explained the new rules. Her household would remain intact, but its access to state matters would be sharply limited. Sir Adrian would not return to confidential briefings. William would oversee future attendance alongside the king's constitutional office. For several painful seconds she said nothing. Then she looked toward the prince and understood the truth beneath the decision. This was not revenge. It was the moment the future monarch finally claimed responsibility for the crown. Charles had formally approved one unified briefing system, ending the ability of separate royal households to place aides inside confidential meetings through informal permission. The system was simple. Every attendee would require clear approval from the sovereign's office and the team responsible for William's constitutional duties. No private circle could quietly add a name again. The king knew the decision would hurt Camilla, but he also knew the monarchy could not survive if trust depended on secret access. Sir Adrian Vale would not return to state-level work. His authority to enter protected meetings was permanently withdrawn, yet he was allowed to leave royal service without public disgrace or an accusation of deliberate betrayal. Adrian had crossed a serious boundary, but Charles refused to destroy him, for following a culture of influence that the palace itself had allowed to grow. Camilla finally turned toward William. She asked whether he truly believed she had ordered her aide to spy on him. The prince chose his words carefully. He said he believed fear had encouraged people around her to cross lines she should have defended. His answer was painful, because it did not accuse her of plotting. It accused her of allowing fear to become permission. The queen consort did not reject the judgment. In a documented private account of the meeting, she admitted that she had worried about becoming irrelevant as William assumed greater responsibility. She had allowed her household to seek reassurance through access it was never entitled to possess. The confession carried no excuse, only sorrow. William assured Camilla that respect would remain. Her security, dignity, and place within the family would be protected. But influence over constitutional matters had to follow duty, not marriage, friendship, or personal closeness. She accepted the distinction and agreed that Adrian would not be reinstated. 3 days later, the state briefing resumed. Charles entered beside his son. William opened the folder he had once left untouched and took his designated seat without interruption. The cancellation had not destroyed the monarchy. It had forced the family to choose what mattered most. Charles protected unity. Camilla accepted limits. William proved that duty was stronger than fear. The door closed on a settled truth. Affection could shape the family. Loyalty could sustain it. But only duty would govern the crown.